What's on, where, and when. It's the Talk of Nelson. NBS Talk Nelson.
At NBS, we believe in banking for life. For over 160 years, we've been a trusted banking provider for generations of locals like you. We know our clients personally and build long-term relationships with them, offering flexibility by giving our staff freedom to make quick decisions to put them first. Experience banking for life with NBS.
The Mako Rugby Roundup.
You're with the Mako Rugby Roundup. It's a great pleasure to welcome Peter Barr to our podcast. Peter, you joined Nelson Bay's Rugby Union in January 1999. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing prior to that and what attracted you to that role?
Sure. Well, I was in the oil industry and had been for 23 years with BP, working both in New Zealand and offshore. And when I decided to leave BP, I was in a senior executive position and I was away from home a lot. And I had two young children and I wasn't really seeing them. So I decided to get out of the corporate world and we were going to come to Nelson, and where my wife was from. And I looked at a couple of business opportunities, but they didn't come to fruition. And then I saw an advertisement for the chief executive of Nelson Bay's Rugby Union, and having a passion for the game, I thought, well, this might be an interesting role. So I came down and had an interview with the then chairman, Max Spence, and the deputy chair, David Kenning, and the president, Roy Tomlinson. And David I had met back in 1981 when I was working for BP here in Nelson, and he and I were in Round Table together. So anyway, that was I got the job, and I started on about the 1st of January, or no, about the 6th of January in 99.
Was that a bit of a bolt out of the blue for them? Would have they expected an application from someone like you?
Look, I don't know. I don't know how many people applied. I might have been the only one. I know. So I don't know.
Because, I'm guessing that you didn't, Max kind of got involved with rugby actually through football and was administrator at Stoke and sort of came through those ranks, whereas, your skill sets came from another field. So, when you sat down, they must have thought, oh, hang on,
how lucky are we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And they obviously saw the skill sets that potentially need to be required for that role.
Well, whilst I was passionate about rugby, I was a broken down hockey player. So, but I could bring business skills to the union, which was probably what it needed at that time. The board was aspirational, and they were looking for a change.
You spent 6 years guiding the union until the end of 2005, NBC. So what were the biggest highlights in that era?
Well, there were many. The first one that springs to mind was the final in 99, when Warren Johnson kicked a goal from the sideline to win against Bay of Plenty. And that was, being in my first year, winning the second division was pretty special. But look, the other fond memories I have when I started, there was only two and a half full-time equivalents. So we were pretty small, and we were housed in the back of the pavilion at Trafalgar Park in a little cubbyhole, basically. And so we really started with nothing. And by the time I left in 2005, we had $1 million in the bank.
Wow.
So that was pretty special. Hosting the first Crusaders game at Trafalgar Park was another highlight. And I think we're going to talk about it a little further, but and look, just the growth of the organisation, bringing on more staff that were really capable. It was a team effort, really. It wasn't all about me.
Some of the players from that era, who are some notables that you can remember?
Well, there's a lot of them, and that's the reason why we're successful. The fact is that during that time I was there, we were never out of the semi-finals. So we had to have a good side, and the likes of the Mark Mills, the Wazza or Warren Johnson, Corey Holdaway, who came and played for us for one season. He came from the Rye Valley. He was an outstanding player and played in the New Zealand under-19 team. And then we had Graham Ching, who was an outstanding number 7, Blair Murphin, who came from Mekamatuhua. He was as tough as nails, and he was probably the best scrummager in the country at that time. And you couldn't budge him in the scrum. So they were some of the players. I mean, there were many. Kelvin Highford was the captain. He was a policeman, and he played number 8, and he was a great player. And look, there'll be others that I've missed, but they were a good team.
Just a couple that I know of that played in the latter years of your Nelson Bays tenure. So Robbie Melnick came on the scene with Nelson Bays and ended up playing a huge number of games for them. Also Mark Bright.
Brady.
Was another one who ended up coming back and playing some.
Well, they played for the Mako.
They both ended up playing for the Mako. So good players.
So in 2006, there was the newly formed Tasman Rugby Union, of which you didn't lead. So what happened there?
Well, if I just take it back a step, I mean, there was myself and Max Spence and David Kenning and Shane Drummond who went over to Marlborough, over the hill, to talk to colleagues over there about amalgamation. And, after a long period of time of negotiation, that came to fruition. And I thought, whilst I was a Wellingtonian who'd come into the region, it didn't take me long to become a fierce adversary with Marlborough. I loved beating them as much as anyone.
Right.
And I really felt that the Tasman Union needed a new leadership, someone that was quite independent of the two provinces, because whilst we had agreed to go ahead, there were people that didn't agree with it. And so perhaps having someone from outside the region who could bring a different focus and had no parochialism would help. So I decided to move on.
But you did end up coming back only, 3 seasons later. You came back as CEO of Tasman in 2008, replacing Lee Jamon. What were the circumstances and who approached you to take on the role?
I was actually managing the Green Acres Golf Club at that time, and I got a call from Max, who was a good friend of mine, and we'd always kept in touch, after I'd left in 2005, and he asked me whether I'd come back, and because they were having financial difficulties, and they needed someone to sort of manage the turnaround, if you like. So I went back not really understanding how dire the situation was, but I was up for the challenge.
So how stressful was that period? We're talking 2008, 2010. There's a fair level of distrust between Nelson Bays and Marlborough in that time.
Well, let's put it this way: my father never had grey hair. Look, I mean, it was stressful. In that first week that I was back, the B&Z from Wellington came over, the senior managers, and gave us the ultimatum that if we didn't sell Lansdowne Park, they would sell it for us, because we had reneged on some principal payments, and whilst they'd given us some opportunity to pay those principal payments back, we just didn't have the money. And so they put the ultimatum on. And so I had to, they gave us 2 weeks really to find a way of selling it. And so I went over, the natural purchaser was the Marlborough District Council. So I went over and spoke to them, and they said no. And I got wind that Ngātahu were looking for some land to build a supermarket and a Bunnings. So through a contact, we approached Ngātahu, who said they were interested. which would have meant that we'd have sold off part of Lansdowne Park. And the general rugby public over there got wind of it, and all hell let loose. And there were letters to the editor of the Marlborough Express, and in the end, the Marlborough District Council thought, well, we've got no option here. This is the jewel in the crown of Marlborough rugby, but also a great facility for the Marlborough District, and to see it going into a Bunnings and a supermarket wouldn't have been an ideal situation. So they bought it. So that helped us pay off the BNZ Bank, but certainly went out of the quagmire. But that was really the start of pulling us out. And it was stressful, but I had a fantastic finance manager in Leanne Hutchison, who was just outstanding. And she had great financial nous. She was hard nosed, and she didn't let the players pull the wool over her eyes. And the other thing that was stressful about it was the fact that the players were, when I had to count up the number of contract players that we had. I think we had 52 contracted players when I stepped in. Well, you can't put 52 players out on a rugby field at any one time. So we slashed that.
10 cars.
We had lots of cars. So we slashed the number of players we contracted, and fair, I give credit to the players. I mean, they understood the situation we were in, and so they took a cut in pay as well. So, but we turned it around, but it was stressful.
But at the same time, New Zealand Rugby are agitating to get rid of 4 teams out of the NPC, including Tasman.
On top of that,
so you were part of the team along with Chairman Max Spence and Coach Todd Blackadder that pitched New Zealand Rugby to be kept in the comp. What are your memories of that presentation?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you say, they were looking to take 4 teams. Well, they were talking of taking out 2, and then they just talked about taking 4 teams out of the competition, going from 14 down to 12, and they talked about 10. But anyway, so we had to go and make a presentation to the New Zealand board to save ourselves. But before we made a presentation, Northland Rugby went in before us, and their chairman was Wayne Peters, who's the brother of Winston Peters. And they had another guy who happened to be a gentleman by the name of Wayne Brown, who was the Far North District Council mayor, who subsequently is now the mayor of Auckland. And if you know his personality, he went in there with all guns blazing, and he tore the New Zealand Rugby Union apart. And that wasn't helpful from their point of view. And having known that, we thought, well, we'll go in and show the respect that we should give to the New Zealand Rugby Union board. And so Max did the first presentation. He talked about the vision of the union and why we amalgamated and how we wanted to give our players the opportunity to play at the most senior level of provincial rugby. And he was really articulate and got his message across. And I presented on the financial situation of the union and how we were going to continue to fund ourselves in the Premier League. And then Todd finished it off with an incredibly emotional, heartfelt presentation, really talking about the players and the team. And collectively, it was a great presentation. And we came away thinking, that was a really compelling case, and there's no way they can keep us out.
And you're right.
And as it turned out, we won.
Yeah. The phone call, I remember. So I can't remember. Max said who rung him up to say you're in. All Black.
An All Black.
Yeah, an All Black. Ex-All Black. He was on the board at the time. Unfortunately, no longer with us. But anyway, Max tells about getting the phone call. Surprisingly to many, you decided to end in 2011 and stand down as CEO. But how satisfying to start that reverse and the losses and what you've gone through, and then leaving the union effectively in a surplus?
Well, I'd done 6 years with Nelson, excuse me, with Nelson Bays, and then another 4 years with Tasman. Excuse me, and I was a great believer that you always leave a place in a better situation than when you came in, and we had turned around the financial situation, and I was tired, to be quite frank. It was incredibly stressful, and you didn't sleep much because you're always worrying about where your next dollar was coming from. But I knew that it was my time to move out, and for someone new to come in and take the union forward. And so, yeah, I handed my notice in, and 6 months later, I was working for the Nelson Pine Industries.
The board members and staff members who gave you support, who was around that time, and who did you have to lean on quite a bit?
Well, I mean, the board, the Nelson Bays board and the Tasman board in my day were aspirational, and it's hard to single anyone out, but there were probably 3 from the early days of Tasman and Nelson Bays that were really important in guiding the union, and they were Max, obviously, and David Kenning, and Drummy. Drummy was a very passionate man about rugby. David was very strategic, and Max was very passionate and a good leader of men. So they were really important in helping me. But then, unfairly, Max got criticised by particularly Marlborough, and so he, in the best interest of the union, resigned, and we brought on Nick Patterson, and Nick Patterson was outstanding. He was an outstanding person. He was very experienced in chairing organisations, and he had a very different style from Max, but he was the man for the moment, and he took us through that rough period where there was a lot of animosity between particularly from Marlborough. And when we went to have these meetings over in Marlborough and talk about selling Lansdowne Park, or the financial issues we had, he was outstanding. People had trust in his leadership, and so I've got great admiration for them. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the staff, again, it's pretty unfair to single anyone out, but I'd have to say that certainly Leanne, she was my rock, really, and she was just the right person to assist in bringing the financial situation, turning it around. But in my latter years with Tasman, I'd have to blow the trumpet of Les here, who brought professionalism, passion, and personality to the marketing and fundraising side. And it was sadly lacking in that area, really, in the commercial side. And Les did a great job in that area. And then one other person that I will single out was Janelle Strickland, who in the very early years, she did a great job in helping the players with their personal development. And then she went on to become the manager, the first woman manager of a provincial team in New Zealand. And she was highly respected by the players. She was really efficient. And she went on to higher levels with team management, and she's still involved with the Black Ferns now. She was with the women's sevens. Yep. So she very, very talented, and she did a great job for Tasman.
Yeah, we had her on the podcast, and
I do. Okay.
Her story is remarkable, Peter, and she was extremely efficient. I'll say that, but very likable as well, and that's really important. And we've been lucky with the Mako to have a string of very, very good team managers.
They're so important.
Yeah.
we have some characters who were managers and but did cause us issues.
Yeah, I'll just continue that
Yes.
train of thought and just say a shout out to Martin Verco and Stu Hunter, and now Hugh Bainan, who have continued, the high aspirational level of management that we expect that Janelle set.
Yeah, it's critical.
I'm just thinking about her story though. She talks about, she came in a slightly different role, or as you said, she was doing sort of player development, wasn't it? Personal development. And then she started learning the management side. So it's that growth within, the organisation itself, giving her a go, because she said there wasn't, if any, many women managers at that level, and the people around them, her and that organisation, gave her the confidence to surge and the encouragement to surge on. So that says a lot, doesn't it? Within the growth within the organisation. Yeah. 2011, you didn't, win a premiership at the time, but there were, I think the support from the public was the fact that they could see within the players, they gave it a good crack, didn't they? They went for it. So who are some of the characters within the early days of the Mako?
I took a lot of satisfaction of seeing local players excel. For instance, got the Tom and James Marshalls, Robbie Melnick, Mark Bright, Joe Wheeler, Quentin McDonald. I mean, they were players in the early days that, they were homegrown. And then some more latterly, you had the James Lowe's of this world, who obviously went on to higher levels internationally. A lot of them coming out of Nelson College. Ethan Blackadder was another one. And then, you had players that came into the province, given the opportunity through the Mako, who had been really successful. I mean, the Tim Perrys of this world, who ended up being an All Black. Alex Ainley, who was one of the longest serving players of the Marcos, Finlay Christie, Alex Nankiville.
No, that 2011 side with those young local players, they were very young.
Yeah,
and then they grew. 2012, won a championship in 2013. So that 2011 side was very, very important.
And of course you had players like David Havili and Mitchell Hunt.
Absolutely,
again local.
Yeah, Liam Squire. It was.
Liam Squire, yeah,
it was just remarkable.
He came from out of town.
But he came to town, and no one would think of him as anything other than a local player now.
One other player that I should mention is Andrew Goodman. Goody was
talisman.
It was a great leader and never had a bad game.
Yeah. The inspiration behind the fins up too. I might add.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So in 2011, as well as, the Mako, all of a sudden there's a disaster in Christchurch with the earthquakes. There's a disaster in the West Coast with Pike River. And you've got to host 4 Crusaders games. And then the World Cup's coming later in the year. And because of Christchurch not being able to host, we went from 2 Rugby World Cup games to 3. So that must have been an amazing way for you to end your tenure.
First of all, I'll take you back to the first one, which was in my first year with Nelson Bays.
Okay.
And, I'm told in the first week that I'm there that I'm going to host a Super Rugby game in May at Trafalgar Park. And I thought, my God, I know nothing about event management, but anyway, we'll give it a crack. And, with 2.5 of us to organise it and having to put up scaffolding on either side of the pavilion, and we didn't have any ticketing management system in those days. I had to do it all myself, and I sold every ticket, 13,500 of them. And we did bring on Neville Mail as our sort of operations guy who looked after the volunteers. But to see that ground on that day was just unbelievable. In that game, where I think the Crusaders were down 31-7 after about 30 minutes and came back to win 58-38. It was just unbelievable. but that gave us the confidence to go on. And I have to say, the Crusaders were just thrilled with the way we managed that game. And then to go on and do another 3 gave us the experience and the confidence to put a pitch in for hosting the World Cup games. And our pitch was around hosting the Italians because of the Italian background here. And we won those rights to host, as you quite rightly pointed out, 2 games initially, and it ended up being 3. It was a privilege to do it. The whole town got behind us. You all remember Les, the longest lunch on Trafalgar Street.
Awesome experience.
Those sorts of things you would have never dreamt would have ever happened in Nelson. There was just a buzz about the place, but we couldn't have done it without Rugby World Cup Limited, the NZR, the Nelson City Council, and our own staff. Everyone knew the role they had to play. All I had to do was lead it, and from a local perspective, obviously there were people higher up the chain that were pulling the purse strings, but it was outstanding. We filled the ground for all the games, and USA versus Russia, the Wallabies playing the last game. It was, as I say, it was a privilege.
I just want to go back to that Pike River experience,
Right?
Because that's early in 2011. All of a sudden, the Crusaders need a home, and they decide that they're going to come to Trafalgar Park. You would have been involved in the negotiations for that to get them here, but that was just the most moving.
It was emotional, yeah.
An emotional day, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
when those 2 teams were standing there before the game, having a minute's silence, it put hairs on the stand up on the back of your neck.
It was. Were you there?
Yeah.
It was remarkable because it's almost like the crowd wants that emotional silence and whatnot, and honouring, right, the event. They didn't know what to do next, but then all of a sudden, all of a sudden, someone yelled out, a cheer, and everyone got into the game. But 4 games for the Crusaders that year. They had to travel all over the world to make the final. And I do have a very strong memory of Russia v Australia, because to see Trafalgar Park absolutely heaving with, I think it was 16,000 people. Remarkable sight. And of course the town lit up, Nelson Rugby Football Club, Club Italia, everyone was having a hell of a party.
I've got an overhead photograph on my study wall of the ground on that day, and it's really impressive.
I remember. I can't remember. My partner was on the committee for the Italian club, and I can't remember whether she was at that time, but the massive push and lobbying from the local Club Italia to try and host the Italian team, and they did it.
Yeah,
they got it,
Miccio,
and Aldo Miccio was part of that. Francis Miccio and Francis Lagruda, and and of course a big history amongst the Italian club with with rugby. A lot of them played local club rugby. So, but then for the Italian team to walk in the Club Italia, and it was just fantastic, and all turned out to support them when they played. So it was great.
My last question on that Rugby World Cup. So as I understand it, like New Zealand Rugby gifted or gave Tasman Rugby some money to host those 3 games, and in fact that was the icing on the cake in terms of filling all of the financial holes.
We got a match fee, which was most welcome. But whilst it was fantastic that we were able to host those games, it did take our focus off the local game, and so there was a cost to it. But financially, we did okay out of it, no question. And if we had the opportunity to do it again, I wouldn't hesitate. Just one other thing I'll say about that Rugby World Cup. I mean, I was lucky enough to go to the final and being hosted by the New Zealand Rugby Union, and I drove up. And driving up through provincial New Zealand, it was just outstanding. I mean, everywhere you went, there was black, and there were signs everywhere and balloons, and it was just that the country came together like it never had done before. They talked about the stadium of 5 million. It's exactly what it was. And then that final, I mean, it was just at the end of it, it was just sheer relief. I mean, it was deathly silence.
It was. Yeah. Come on, Richie, don't play the ball on the ground.
Richie going up to kick it out. Okay. Right. Well, so when you stood down, there were 3 divisions of senior rugby, 12 clubs playing Premier grade. Now there are 2 divisions and 7 clubs. So presumably you're an outside observer now. Have you got any thoughts around what's happening? Well, definitely in Nelson, but presumably it's right across regional rugby, about what's happening with senior rugby participation.
It's not. It goes right down to the midgets playing the game. I mean, there are less people playing the game. And I think one of the issues is the safety aspect of it. And Johnny's mum is saying, no, you're going to play soccer or you're going to play basketball, whatever it might be. So there is that safety aspect that's played a part. We were losing players at secondary school level, and we still do. And it's partly due to the fact, I think, that clubs and colleges have lost that connection. And there's been that battle that's been going on for years about where college players should be playing their game, whether they should be playing for their colleges or whether they should be playing for their clubs. And that debate will rage on into infinitum, in my view. There's no simple answer to it, but I mean, I think maybe there's an opportunity to attract players back is. Because you've got to pull them away from whatever else they're doing, whether it be working part-time in the supermarket or whether they're playing other sports or whether they're playing on their Xboxes or whatever it might be. You've got to make it attractive and fun for them. And so maybe they need to develop a hybrid game. And I was thinking about that last night. I mean, what would attract players back to the game at the sort of primary school, secondary school level? Maybe they only play 20 minutes each way. And they don't have practices on a Tuesday and Thursday night in the middle of bloody winter. And this hybrid game might be that there's no kicking. That, you keep the ball on hand and you keep it in field. It sounds like it might end up being like rugby league, but maybe you get more points for wingers get more points for scoring tries than
number eights and hookers.
A prop, yeah. So that you're actually kicking the ball out wide, and so it becomes more of a running game, and through that, it's far more fun, and also the big boys are not dominating the game. But one thing is you can't stand still. There's got to be change, and you've got to think outside the square, and I'm not sure that they're doing that. Obviously, women have made a difference in bringing them on board, but it is sad to see so many clubs that have just drifted away, and it is also partly due to the fact that the agricultural scene in New Zealand has changed, and it used to be that when you're farming beef and cattle and beef and lamb, you had shepherds and all those people have gone. It's now horticulture and viticulture, and that's brought in seasonal workers who are not allowed to play the game, or they go home before the season starts.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the case in Marlborough, where all of those farms and they played an agricultural style of rugby. There's no doubt about that. Big farmers and the forward backs and whatnot. It's just not there anymore. So yeah, I think that, and also people are time poor.
That's right. Well, it's not
timing of games, lights to play at night, those sorts of things as well could help.
Yeah, and also I think we need to find more people that come into volunteer into the clubs. I mean, when I left rugby, you had the same old people, and all due respects to them, I mean they were holding their clubs together, and they had been for years, and there were no younger people coming through. And
Yeah, that's
when those people that have been managing the clubs for years drift off, you lose your momentum, and people lose interest. And
it's definitely a problem, the number of people who've got the time or the inclination to volunteer. Peter, lastly, you mix with people in high places, Mr. Spence, President of New Zealand Rugby. I'm just interested, obviously, you talk over a coffee or a beer occasionally. What's your general consensus on the decision regarding the Pilkington report and the where the provincial unions got to?
Right. Well, I'm in the interest of protecting Max, so I will give you my opinion.
Sorry, Max, leave you up the garden path. We'll get him on.
Mind you, he was referee, wasn't he?
Yeah. No,
I did watch the vote on the video, and he was very good at adjudicating.
He presided over the meeting.
He presided over the meeting because Patsy Reedy was overseas. So, my opinion, I was bitterly disappointed they didn't go with option one. They need radical change in the organisation. And look, I mean, the Constitution is not fit for purpose any longer. And it hasn't been, even back in my day, I don't think it really was. It's been around since day dot. And the big unions have too much power in my view. And so they've influenced a lot of what has gone on in recent times. And I just felt that, if with option one, where they were looking for a completely independent board, that board and its selection of the board members, there was a matrix of skills and experience that you had to bring. And of course, part of the skills was actually having had understanding of the game. So, whilst some of the provinces were paranoid about the fact that there wasn't anyone there with rugby experience, well, the matrix would have dealt to that. And so what's happened is provincial unions got their way, and we're not going to go forward, in my view. If you look at now, they have the governance advisory panel, who now will select who the committee that will actually select the directors. It seems incredibly bureaucratic, and the provinces still have control over they have control of the gap. They have the most votes, and so to me,
and when you look at those votes, Auckland has 7 votes versus Tasman with 2. There's disparity, isn't it? But anyway,
so it'll be interesting to see who actually is on GAP. I think there's 3 provincial unions. Maori also have a representative. The Players Association have a representative, and I'm not sure whether there's any others. Well, we've already heard that the Players Association not putting up a representative. So who knows what might happen? Watch this space, as they say. It's disappointing.
Very good. There was big debate, wasn't there, Les?
No, it's been a huge
about
debate.
It was interesting. I guess because my worry was that you would have an independent board that might start making decisions that weren't representative of the community game. That was without going into the detail. But when I watched the vote, what I didn't realise is the fact that it's based on regions and their player base, and so Auckland has a big say. So what you're saying is that in those smaller regions, that kind of cuts out any potential moves. It's not one provincial vote, one voice, is it? It's
well, I think it probably should be every province has an equal vote, but it's not the way it is.
No, it's not the way it is.
We'll see what happens. But the thing is that we just don't need this bad publicity at this time. And the other thing is, I mean, if you look at the cricket, they went for a purely independent board, and they lost their way because if you remember, they went from mainstream TV for their for televising their matches to Spark streaming. Well, they lost a lot of their fan base. So if you're going to have an independent board, you've got to make sure that you have directors that understand the game. It's not about just having a whole lot of businessmen and women who, have governance experience. It's got to be more than that.
Very good. Thank you, Peter. It's been absolute pleasure having you in here. Massive history, for a guy from Wellington that played hockey.
Well, actually, this conversation gave me some time to sort of reflect, because it's a long time ago.
I mean, what I didn't realise about Max was that he was a football player. He said I was better at football than I was at rugby.
Yeah.
But he, it just goes to show that it's the mix of skill sets that you need in any organisation.
Well, yeah. I mean, Max was, I think, is the only New Zealand rugby president who never played the game.
Yes, well done, Tasman, on promoting him. Peter, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. You and I go back to 2010 when I first met you over a couple of coffee meetings, and I liked you then. I like you now. So, great to have you on the podcast.
Both working on your golf scores. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Peter, for coming in. It's been a great pleasure, and a lot of history there. So I'm sure great listening for our listeners. Thank you, Les.
The Mako Rugby Roundup. What's on, where, and when? It's the Talk of Nelson. NBS Talk Nelson.